Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at Character Voice by CM Taylor. We had taken a look at one of her videos before, but we want to take a look at how to create a character's voice. So what is character voice? Character voice pretty much comes down to the idea that each individual character that we write has its own distinct way of speaking. One of the ways that we can see this happening is as Brandon Sanderson says, if you can have three different characters in the same section of dialogue without dialogue tags, but you can distinctly tell who's talking, then you know you have nailed the idea of character voice. So character voice is one of those things that helps us connect with our characters and allows for our readers to have an understanding and be able to emotionally connect with the characters of our stories. When characters are nothing more than just words on the page, we aren't able to properly connect with our readers. We want to make sure that in our readers' minds that we actually have an image and a voice and a way of speaking that our readers can hear, although mentally, the way that our characters are talking. So let's get into the video.
Here's my one favorite tip on how to practice character voice. I do this whenever I'm starting a new project or whenever I'm having trouble nailing how a character sounds, either in dialogue or in narration. First, I'm going to pick a room. Could be a room in the actual setting of the story, or it could be anywhere. And in a notebook, I might draw a layout of the room or note features of the room that I'm aware there is the person who, mentally created the room. Then I'm going to make columns or lists for each of the characters whose voices I'm working on, and I'm going to note down 4 things. What things in that room do they notice? What do they find interesting? What do they like? And what do they dislike?
One of the things that she's talking about here is actually creating a bond between the character that we are writing about and the room that they're in. One of the ways that we can tell an object is in the room is by light bouncing off of it. In that same way, we are creating light bouncing off our characters by allowing things to have an impact on the character and how the character perceives it. This gives us more than just the simple words on the page, but also a deeper understanding of how the characters are able to relate what's going on. And because each character has their own bias, their own perspective on what's going on, that gives us a deeper understanding of the character. This helps us show this for our readers. And these are very specific tools that we can use to help increase that understanding of the characters beyond what the actual words of the pages are.
For example, if you have a character who's like special forces or a spy, odds are they're going to notice the exits. A detective might find the knickknacks or the family photos interesting because they say something about the person they're investigating. A snobby, elitist type character might come into this living room and see these old floral print couches and be absolutely aghast by how tacky they are. A character who's broke might come into this beautiful, cozy living room and be just incredibly jealous because they want something like this so badly. Because voice isn't just about what's coming out of their mouth, it's about their perspective.
Another thing we could do here is we can actually invert this. If we think about having a preset way of our characters are interacting with the world, if we invert that and show that our characters specifically aren't acting in the way that we'd expect them to. So for instance, if we are showing somebody who is poor, they go into a room, instead of showing them as being jealous of what they're seeing, but they are seeing it as a tacky, or they have different things. This gives us a deeper understanding beyond what we would expect. But this has to be done purposefully, and it has to be the attention of the reader drawn to it, or else we can fall afoul of creating a confusion of the story. So when we do things where we are breaking the mold, we have to do it purposefully, and we have to make it obvious that we are doing that so that our readers have an understanding of what's going on.
And training yourself to slip on that character's perspective whenever you're in their point of view or whenever they're talking, that is a really great skill to have. There is, of course, another layer to voice, and it's not just what they say, but how they say it. So I'll typically take more notes for each character, aimed towards what kind of vocabulary they use.
Vocabulary is another way of showing the diversity of our characters. By having them use specific words or having them use specific phrases, we can help indicate where this person's from, but also the type of characters that they are on the page. So for instance, if you have somebody from the South, an American South, they're going to use very specific lingo. They're going to have very specific ways of talking. These are ways that you can show in their story about how you are encouraging a characterization of the person that's on the page, and not just in a way that's tacky, but in a way that's nuanced. So for instance, you can have somebody who is from a very specific portion of the future, and you are creating a world around that character. Now, does this person have a different set of speaking patterns because they're in a more sequestered area? Do they have a way of talking that is completely different than what would normally be understood? But it has to be done in a very subtle way, lest we confuse our readers.
And training yourself to slip on that character's perspective whenever you're in their point of view or whenever they're talking, that is a really great skill to have. There is, of course, another layer to voice, and it's not just what they say, but how they say it. So I'll typically take more notes for each character aimed towards what kind of vocabulary they use. Are they more talkative, where they're going to be speaking and have multi-clause sentences, or are they more taciturn and direct? Do they use flowery speech or simple speech? Do they cuss? Do they say Do they call people darling and love? A character who says, "Babes, I have got to know where you got this coffee table book," is going to sound a lot different than, "Alice, what have I told you about getting the springs in this couch fixed?" Is going to sound different from, "Wow, I didn't know you had a kitty." Once you have a bead on what they notice,
These are all different ways of characterizing our characters. So one of the ways that we are doing it is by using very specific words, very specific speech patterns, and very specific things that you can actually use to help establish a character in the mind of our reader. Now, once you've established that character, you can go ahead and change it up and move things around. So for instance, if you have somebody who's a very, like I mentioned earlier, somebody who's a very southern way of speaking, a character that has been from the South, and you've established that solidly, but then they go ahead and change something up. This is a note for our readers that something has changed within the story that allows for another level of storytelling.
what they find interesting, what they like, what they dislike, and how they might sound while they express that, either in dialogue or in narration. Then have each of those characters walk into that room and describe it as the point of view character. Remember, they can only describe what they notice. Then write another passage where each of those characters tells a friend in dialogue what that room looked like. Because what we say...
So these are all just ways of practicing, and as I've mentioned before, there are some things that get added in our first draft, and then there's stuff that gets added later drafts. So for instance, when we're talking about the nuanced dialogue, we tell this probably after the first draft, so we have an understanding of the story, but we also understand what the characters are trying to say. And by doing this, we are able to create a translation from what we are telling the story to do versus how the characters are feeling. So we want to make sure that this isn't necessarily something that we have to put in our first draft, but though it can help, we need to make sure that we are being very particular about how we're telling the story and don't allow for us to become bogged down in details. These things can be added later on, like flavoring. We don't necessarily add the salt too early of the stew, lest it becomes overburdened and we don't do the things in process correctly.
Out loud, and how we sound in speech is often just a little bit different from how we sound when we're narrating. Repeating this exercise has really helped me get a handle on my characters' voices before I actually get to the writing part, and I hope it helps you as much as it's helped me.
So spending time in our story, just getting to know the characters, is a very important skill that we should be developing as writers. So this isn't necessarily something that we have to be overburdened in our story, but we should make time to actually tell these different ways on different perspectives for our story to help us create real characters. As I always say, creating characterization and creating emotionality for our readers to engage with is one of the best ways of showing our story rather than simply telling. We want to make sure that our readers are actually experiencing and be able to emotionally feel what the characters are feeling, and having them each individual character rather than a blob of different characters. That allows for those emotions to properly be leaked through the pages to our reader. So overall, one of the ways that we can tell these different ways of characterization and voice is actually putting in the practice ahead of time. We want to make sure that, as she mentioned, having an understanding of how to show these characters' voices rather than just simply telling what's on the page. There's a practice that has to go into this in order to do this properly. So anytime you have a chance and you have a character that you are trying to figure out and feel out, a way of doing that is actually doing what she's described, having a character show into the room and showing the different things and the perspectives that character would have, and actually having them show it rather than just putting the words on the page. So having more familiarity with some things versus not as familiar with other things. These are different ways of showing the character beyond what's actually written down and what's on the page. So all of this goes into the characterization and into the voice that we are presenting to our readers. All right, that's all I had for today. As always, I will be linking all the resources I use in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave it in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.